Gavin squirms like the snake that he is.
It's just interesting as you bring up AIPAC.
AIPAC. I ain't thought about her in years. AIPAC.
He's a communist. That's not a socialist.
Ooh. Dun, dun, dun.
I think it's just the practical application of ideals.
That man is lying right through his face there.
Cory Booker commits ritual suicide.
And I get these questions all the time that to me undermine my urgency.
Katie, I Stand With Israel Porter has a series of implosions like a sociopath.
Get out of my fucking shop.
The Mamdani support blows my mind.
The reason why Malcolm said what he said about the white liberal being the most dangerous thing is that an open enemy is less dangerous to you than a concealed enemy.
I mean, I thought I was kind of cooking when I figured I should have you both on at the same time. I had no idea that it was going to be, I'm just going to say it, I think this is one of my all-time favorites. I feel like I'm in a similar situation with Zohran Mamdani, for instance, where I certainly hope he beats Andrew Cuomo. Yeah. I certainly love the way that he's changed the conversation around any number of issues, but specifically around Gaza. I think he's a generational talent. I think there's a lot to be learned from him. But when he starts to retrench on some of his prior commitments, when he backtracks on what I feel like is a pretty anodyne statement, like, yeah, the cops are racist. The Supreme Court just found them to be unconstitutional, their practices within the last 10 years. You know, it also concerns me, and I feel like it's my obligation as a journalist to talk about it. So I try to do so in a way that makes it clear that I am trying to help and push him in the direction I'd like him to go, as opposed to trying to hurt him or trying to empower Cuomo, for instance. But you know, I don't think he is served well by me pretending that he's not making moves that I think are not just like morally bad choices, politically bad choices, but also like strategically bad choices, because I don't see capitulating on these issues as earning him any more votes from the bad faith folks who are criticizing him.
Why would he be doing this then?
I mean, I think that's the fundamental question. He's up so significantly in polls. He had a very strong performance last night, and I think polls indicate that he's going to be up even more. There's nothing at this point, you know, they've thrown the kitchen sink at him already. So I don't know. I would have more sympathy for his choices if it really were a nail biter, but it's just not. So I don't know. At first I thought maybe it's something like, you know, there was all this reporting that he was sitting down with, you know, Jewish community members. And I have empathy for the idea that a human being, when confronted with someone who rightly or wrongly feels aggrieved, wants to assuage those concerns, like on a human level, right? Like, I'm friends with Marianne Williamson, and God knows that we do not agree on Palestine, and we be at each other's throats sometimes. I mean, mostly we try not to bring it up, but it came up recently, and they almost had to kick us out of this restaurant. But like on a interpersonal level, I can understand he's like going to be mayor of New York. Hey, Butch, sorry, I see you there.
No, I'm assuming we're talking about Zohran and why the AOCification has been so rapid.
Yeah. And I'm saying, like, on a human level, I get like wanting to just like assuage someone's concern in a face-to-face with some, you know, old lady from Brooklyn or whatever. Like, I get it. Yeah. But that's a very different thing than being public facing in interviews that he's obviously very well prepared for, and debates that he's very well prepared for. And he has talking points, and he's so adept at reframing questions and shifting away from a bad faith framing that he's choosing not to do so on certain issues, including criminal justice issues, which I would argue are way less polarizing than Israel was perceived to be. Yep. So again, if he never was confident on Israel, if he never was bold on Israel, I would be like, yeah, sure. Okay, this is at least consistent. Like, fine. It's who he is. But the choice to like be willing to throw it all away, to say globalize the intifada, but then not to be willing to defend an issue like police reform, which was popular in getting bipartisan buy-in just 5 years ago, is confusing to me.
If I might, sorry to be joining late. And by the way, Richard, really an honor to meet you, man. I'm looking forward to this conversation for some time. My colleague at UC Riverside, Dylan Rodriguez, I think offers the most useful insight into this. He says that the Democrat Party is the most effective counterinsurgency organization ever to emerge in modern history. It is where true change goes to die. And they seek out any agents of change and look to co-opt them, castrate them, and completely and totally neutralize any actual like transformative potential. So Mamdani, has just been, the Dems are going to Dem, and that is exactly what they do.
Yeah,
and if Bernie couldn't flip them, then how's Mamdani going to do it?
It's the Mamdani piece that's confusing. Like, of course, Dems are going to dim, but I think, I'll speak for myself, my excitement about him initially, prior to him winning the primary, and then certainly after he won, was rooted in the idea that it seemed like there were all these things about his pedigree, who his father was, the things he tweeted and said in the past, his long-term investment in New York City politics, hunger striking for the taxi cab drivers, all of this stuff pointed to the idea that he had deeply held convictions and that he wasn't shying away from them, and that he won without shying away from them, right? That's what was so exciting about it. It kind of proved our narrative that you don't have to compromise to win. Yep. And so, to me, like, I'm willing to still hold on to the idea, or I have no reason not to believe that, like, in his heart of hearts, he still believes all of those things. The question is, to me, like, what are there distinct, is there a specific kind of pressure, threat that he has been subjected to? Or has he just got enough of those Obama people in his ear? I don't know if you read the Astrid Herden article in the New York Times, but does he have enough of those Obama people in his ear that he has begun to believe that he has to moderate to actually win? Is there something concrete that he's been offered that he maybe foolishly thinks is worth trading some of these rhetorical commitments for? Am I wrong? Is he correct that it's worthwhile to say the police aren't racist, actually, if he gets, I don't know what would be worth that, right? To manufacture consent for a racist New York City Police Department. But you could imagine a world where you said, okay, well, now we're going to get, universal pre-K or, something that's, material for the people of New York. And then who am I to shake a stick at it? I'm just a person on the internet. That's the argument, right? And I don't want to lose my credibility either. I mean, to be so transparent and become like a hater who can't appreciate the value of Zohran, even in his compromised state, right? He's compromised, sure, but he's, I might not like that he didn't say, of course, Hamas doesn't have to demilitarize. No one would ask that of any other country in the scenario that was just subjected to a genocide. But at least he didn't say, yes, they should demilitarize. Except he did then say that. I don't know if you saw that. That's the newest. So in that one interview with Caitlin, what's her name, he refused to opine. And then he was asked at the debate last night, and he said, of course, Hamas should lay down their weapons. So I don't know. I'm trying just to be as good faith in my critique of him as possible. But I also feel like I can do that because I know ultimately, frankly, I'm going to be validated. Unfortunately, I believe that all of my concerns will be validated.
And you have the fallback that if they aren't, you might take a certain pleasure in having had some role in the fact that they may be known. Yes.
And to that end, to the present conversation, I'm very... Look, I don't want to take credit and do a victory lap, but we had Lathan on this show the day before that he interviewed Gavin Newsom. And I know that he used to listen to Rising prior to my departure. He currently listens to Breaking Points and has Ryan Grim on all the time. He is someone who is very much consuming left media. And I think you can hear in the interview with Gavin Newsom that he brought that lens and asking a number of questions that don't ordinarily get posed to someone in Newsom's position. So that is why I am extremely excited to have the two of you gentlemen on Bad Faith Podcast at the same time for a weirdly Halloween-themed werewolf episode.
There we go.
It's definitely scary out there. I mean, we can say that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, neither of you need any introduction. Economist Richard Wolff has been on the show a number of times, and he is my go-to person when I want to have a Marxist analysis of some economic conversation afoot. So welcome back, Professor Wolff.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And Butch Ware, he was the Green Party vice presidential candidate in 2024, along with Jill Stein, and is currently running to be governor of California. Welcome back, Butch.
Always a pleasure, Bree, and especially in such auspicious company with Professor Wolff.
Oh, I'm so glad. I didn't realize you guys hadn't connected before, so I am very happy to be the conduit for that as well.
I'll be watching all your videos, man. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, I'm having a fanboy moment, right now.
You're very kind. That's why we do them. We're prisoners of the internet. We do it, we send it out, and then who knows? Right? Who knows?
All right. Well, the reason I wanted you two in particular to be a part of this conversation is because, as I mentioned earlier, Van Lathan, I think, did a really excellent job in raising some fundamental issues about wealth disparities and the role that capitalism is playing in the affordability crisis in his interview with Gavin Newsom on Higher Learning. Now, the interview ended up going mega viral, largely because of a clip that we'll get to later in the podcast, in which Gavin Newsom was asked about his relationship with AIPAC and other pro-Israel PACs, and sort of had a little bit of a meltdown about that. But before we get into the part of the interview that's gotten so much traction, I want to start at the beginning and play you a little bit of how this got set up. Now, they opened the interview by showing Gavin Newsom a clip of Joe Rogan talking about Gavin Newsom and how he basically doesn't get it. And that opens up a conversation about whether or not the Democrats broadly have failed to meet this affordability crisis that has become really central to the broader political conversation in the United States of America. And the feeling is that the party who has a better grasp of bringing down cost of living, whether it's housing, groceries, gas, et cetera, is going to be the one that prevails in the midterms and in the next election cycle. So I want to start us around the 6:30 mark, if I could, where Newsom attributes Joe Rogan's framing to a kind of California derangement syndrome and an undue focus on that particular state as emblematic of everything that's wrong with the Democratic Party. Let's start there.
You think Joe Rogan has a problem?
I don't know. I said of his, they tend to align sometimes with him. I didn't say him. Mm-hmm. But some folks in the far right, the primetime lineup at Fox, for example, that's almost made a living out of trying to tear down California. And it makes sense because everything they're promoting runs contrary to what California is doing and how we're succeeding. How do we continue to thrive despite all of their rhetoric? I mean, look at across the board, productivity, wages in the state of California dominate compared to other red states. The biggest murder states in America are red states, 8 of the top 10. Dependency. You talk about dependency. Texas is a taker state. California in 2023, $83.1 billion. We gave more to the federal government than we received. Texas took $71.1 billion. I mean, so I could go down the list as it relates to deaths of despair, as it relates to loneliness, lower wages, higher death rates, higher infant mortality, maternal mortality, lower life expectancy, all in these red states compared to the blue states. And their state of mind is just dominantly criticizing the most vibrant and dynamic state in America. I find that rather curious, honestly.
Well, how do you feel about the fact that right now we're, in the middle of a massive affordability problem, and California is the tip of the spear for that? 15% of California residents right now can afford the average home
been that way
in
for
California.
Decades. It's a major crisis.
So, I mean, when you hear the things that Joe Rogan is saying, and we on this podcast battle back and forth with Joe Rogan and that type of politic and that thinking all the time. But when you hear that, there is a cohort of people that feel like the state is too expensive for them. They can't live the American dream here. They can't afford a home here. And that could have explained some of the exodus that you saw to places like Austin or Florida or the places like that where things might...
Well, we per capita, more Floridians moving to California than Californians moving to Florida. Mm-hmm. Our population's been growing over year to year. I mean, he's just making that stuff up. That's why he don't want me on the show.
Right. Specifically to affordability of homes and things like that. What
now, the issue of affordability, it explains more things in more ways on more days about problems in California. Issues of housing, supply-demand imbalance. Been that case for decades now. We're as dumb as we want to be. We've got to get out of our own way. We got to build more damn housing. That's why I literally tied my budget last year to the most significant housing reforms in California history. That's why I'm about to sign one of the most significant housing bills in years in California as it relates to density bonuses around transit corridors. We're moving from a NIMBY mindset, not in my backyard, to this YIMBY mindset, and we're being very aggressive. Let me be more specific. Not only are we promoting reforms in terms of the regulatory system that's slowing down development of more housing to address the affordability challenge, but I also created a housing accountability unit where we're quite literally suing cities that are not producing enough housing. The state of California has a state of mind that is completely aligned with that critique. And that's why we've been very aggressive, because at the end of the day, forgive the vernacular, localism is determinative, meaning state's vision is realized locally. We don't build the housing, we create the conditions. And so cities like Huntington Beach refuse to even zone housing, let alone build housing. So we sued them. This affordability framework is not complicated. It's Econ 101. And we have been more robust in the reforms with this abundance mindset, Ezra Klein talking a lot about that. And we're aligned with that.
Okay. All right. Let's wrap it there. It's Econ 101. We have a professor of economics with us and a challenger to Newsom for the governor of New York. I see you champing at the bit, Butch, to get in there. So I'm going to give you first bite of the apple.
Well, I mean, I would love to hear Professor, Wolff's analysis, but since you invited me in, what is this jackass talking about? I mean, honest to God. So the state of California, which that he's like offering as this model, and you'll hear the Democrats say this repeatedly, that it's the fourth largest economy in the world, but they won't point out that it's according to most of the metrics, it's the state in the union that has the highest income inequality. It also recently, a study pointed out that it has the highest poverty levels, tied with Louisiana, that there are 186 billionaires in this state and 187,000 people that sleep on the streets every single night. That just in Silicon Valley, there are 9 households that control $683 billion worth of wealth. And blocks away, I'm doing food distribution at a homeless encampment. The same kind of homeless encampment that Gavin Newsom is literally going out and clearing, basically stealing stuff from the poorest people in our state. So for me, and then the last part of it, right, where he's talking about we need to build. Yeah, definitely. We definitely want more handouts to your developer buddies from the California tax base, because there's actually 14 vacant units in the city of San Francisco alone for each homeless person. The problem isn't building. They've been doing lots of building directly to the cronies of the Newsom administration. And that's their model, right? Because that's what neoliberal economics is, and that's how it functions. And the Democrats are, to the right of Reagan in the way that they execute neoliberal economic game plans in this current moment. So for me, this is just a steaming pile of hot neoliberal garbage. And those of us that live, like Van Lathan does, in the state of California are going to call bullshit on Gavin Newsom's bullshit. And I would love to hear from the economist on this, but I can barely sit still when I see that kind of gross misrepresentation.
Okay, let's bring you in, Professor Wolff. What do you make of his characterization of what's driving the affordability crisis in California and in the country broadly? He says it's Econ 101. What say you?
Yes, well, I teach Econ 101, and if he had taken my class, I don't think he would say it, or if he did say it, he would hang his head and he would know what he is doing. Mm-hmm. I think the giveaway is what he said himself. Notice at least twice, if I heard him correctly, he said, because he needs to get it in there, It's been that way for decades.
Yes.
Here's a clue, Jack. If it's been that way for decades, maybe that's the problem. Maybe for decades you've allowed housing, one of the most fundamental needs human beings have, food, clothing, shelter, right? The three basic things people have to have before all else can be talked about. You haven't done a very good job. And you know why? Because you've relied on the profit motive. Houses get built when it's profitable to do so. It's the same problem we have with jobs. People get a job if it's profitable for an employer to hire them. In other words, the vast majority of people looking for jobs are held hostage to the tiny minority who offer jobs, but who only do it if and when it's profitable. That's the problem. That's why it's been this way for decades. Because you're forever, if I may quote him, creating the conditions. Oh, at the state level. Oh, creating the conditions, Jack, isn't enough, because you're leaving it to the profit motive to respond to those conditions. And the profit motive has done that. That's why we have overbuilding of luxury housing and inadequate building for everybody else. And by the way, that's not very different in California than it is in many other places in this country. But if you listen to Mr. Newsom, if you listen, what's hidden here is what is so often hidden. You're assuming that there is no role for a non-profit-based decision about allocating resources and making investments. I'm going to do something a little daring here, but I'm hope I'm among friends.
Absolutely.
There is mockery of the Chinese. Why? Because they have lots of housing that they build before people need it. If you go around China, you will see empty housing projects that have been built. Their theory is we have to build it where we want the development to go, not wait for the development. So the notion we couldn't do it, of course we could do it, if we had priority for shelter. And I won't bore you with all the studies that show if you don't provide stable, secure, adequate shelter, you are going to have 47 other social problems. Your kids won't do well in school. You're going to have abuse, on and on and on. So we know the importance. We know if the private sector, and here I'm not going anywhere beyond Franklin Roosevelt or Bernie Sanders for that matter, if the private sector can't or won't do it, well, then some other mode of getting it done. What happens with people like Mr. Newsom is if the private sector can't do it, and then his voice trails off, as if that were the only option. But it's not the only option. That's pure ideological blinder that makes it impossible for that man to talk about what he could do. Because if you're the governor, you can mobilize public money, both state and local, and even federal, even with a crazy government like the one we have now. But you certainly ought to talk about it. And then there's cooperative housing, which, by the way, California once pioneered, if you go back far enough after World War II. So stop. It's like having these conversations about the budget, in which all we hear about is the juxtaposition. Either we have to cut spending or we'll have to have a deficit. No, you can tax corporations and the rich. We've done that before. We can do that again. And what kind of a politician are you when you can't, you're so dependent on your donors that you can't even say it? Wow, that's a level of immersion in the, if I may quote Butch, in the bullshit that is not admirable.
Can I jump in with 30 additional seconds just because of what Professor Wolff just set off inside my heart? Who funds you runs you, right? Like when I do debates with the Democrat candidates, I can literally watch them processing the answers. Like they're literally thinking of the specific donor that will pull their support if they answer the question the way that the question needs to be answered. And I'm just going to say all of the things that can be done, there's a mountain of them, right? Blackstone and BlackRock alone, between single family housing and larger, complexes, some studies are showing Bay Area, it's 20%, others up to a third of the housing. That is what's driving the crisis and the crisis of affordability. You don't, first of all, definitely China makes strategic decisions about how to deploy state capital when the private sector is obviously not going to step up in those domains. But I'll give you another example. As governor of California, our plan is simple. I'm going to tax out of Blackstone and BlackRock for all of those vacant units that they're holding on to that are raising both the cost of home ownership and home rentals. And I'm going to tax them so hard that they can't wait to sell them to the state. Because in Vienna, 43% of the units on the rental market are state-owned and operated at cost. So alongside basic rent control mechanisms, if you have this state-determined market influence on the housing market, that means that people in Vienna right now, the average renter pays 28% of their monthly income on rent. What's that number like in California? I got students, we have faculty in the UC system where I teach. I'm here in my office at UCSB that live in their cars and their faculty. That same Gavin Newsom said that he made a carve out for the vagrancy laws, that they're now locking up people for sleeping in public. But there's a carve out if you have a university ID, you're allowed to sleep in your car. No, I'm not joking, Bree. I'm not joking. That they don't want our students and even our graduate students and faculty members who are homeless and sleeping in their cars to be treated like the rest of the riffraff that they happily lock up. And that last point is like Professor Wolff was alluding to. I'll put it this way. If all you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. If the only tool in your toolkit is to put a toll booth in front of a public service, right, so that the private sector can take a cut off the top and eat before anybody else eats, then every solution that you devise is going to produce that outcome.
Brianna, if I could add one thing so this point kind of sinks in. I'm a professor of what's called economic history. And in other words, mostly I've been teaching courses that look at the economic aspect of how did the United States go from a British colony to what it is today? Why did China go from being so terribly poor to the powerhouse it is today? And on and on and on. And here's a piece of evidence that has a million examples. When you have taken the step of saying, okay, the private sector did X, but it is not doing Y, can we do Y, and will it be useful for X? And the examples are endless. For example, if you take homeless people off the street and provide decent, adequate, safe housing, the social benefits of that are incalculable and easily dwarf the private profit issue. For example, we know that if you raise a family in a stable, secure housing, you're going to be using medical facilities less than you otherwise might. You're going to have different employment history, different success in the school for you, and on and on and on. 10% of, I'm speaking to you from New York City, 10% of the students here in New York City are homeless. 10% is staggering. And every teacher will tell you that it is disaster for their performance in school. They don't know where they're going to sleep that night. They don't know whether they'll be in a shelter with their parents, not with their parents, on and on. So we know that the social benefit, by the way, we teach this, tell Mr. Newsom, in Econ 101, we teach what I'm about to do. We explain to people that there's something called private profit. That's what the private investor seeks and gets. But then there's something called social profit. Those are all the benefits that flow from an investment, but not to the private person who makes them. They're sometimes called externalities because they happen outside of the capitalist calculus. But they're monstrously important. We teach that to students. We don't let people build a factory that spews smoke, because even if it's profitable for the factory owner to build it, the smoke causes emphysema, makes you clean your clothes more often, messes up the paint of your house. And when you add up all those costs, it's not a profitable investment. But since the private owner doesn't have to bear the costs, it doesn't figure in the capitalist calculus. But if you're rational, you don't think like you take them all into account, because we have to live with all of them. It's not that complicated.
And we're subsidizing.
Absolutely. So the joke is, if you took care of these social problems, the consequences will, in the end, here's the irony, benefit the private profitability in many cases. They're losing too by the narrowness of their commitment to their immediate concern. It's the old lesson that comes from Uncle Carl. Capitalism isn't good, not even for the capitalists.
Oh, okay. So my hot and maybe bourgeois academic take is that Democrats should spend more time vilifying negative externalities the way that Republicans vilify immigrants. The real problem is all of these unspoken costs that we're living with. I'm going to play this just for another second, and then we're going to jump ahead.
And so it is the issue that explains the big critique that is completely legitimate as it relates to the state of California, and has been for decades and decades. And it's the one issue that I'm most proud that we've tackled in terms of policy changes head on. But the rationalization of those policies need to be promoted and realized ultimately locally. And that's something that needs to take shape. And that's why we're being very aggressive, and it hasn't yet. And it's also something taking shape all across the country.
Sure.
The affordability issue is the issue that defines, I think, the greatest stress for people 30 and younger in this country, and why they are increasingly tapped out of both political parties and pissed off because we're not delivering for them. And so housing, amen, man, is the legitimate claim of critique in this state.
Do you think this affordability issue, even in Northern California, San Francisco used to be the mayor, just so people know, you have an $18 minimum wage there, and the average one-bedroom home is, a one-bedroom apartment, should I say, is $3,000 a month. Do you think that this issue is a broader issue that has to do with maybe a critique and controls on American capitalism? California, for example, has, hosted and been very giving and loving and nurturing to a lot of the Silicon Valley companies that have come here and called Northern California home. And that has resulted in breathtaking income inequality and affordability issues for the regular people of California, the average people. And that's something that we've seen explode across the country as Americans seem to be left behind by their government in favor of the richest 1% of the country. How do we deal with that in a more broad sense than just looking at it?
So that's a foundational question about, free enterprise and capitalism. And that's an issue for a 30-year trend line that's now a headline as it relates to wealth, not just income, inequality.
Well, I actually meant to say wealth. Yeah.
And look, that's underscored by the fact that you have quite literally 2/3 the wealth in the hands of just 10% of the population. That same 10%, by the way, that's about 50% of consumer spending in this country. And so it's increasingly in the hands of fewer and few people. And that's why people like Bernie Sanders are so resonant and so popular and have such a strong base.
Zohran Mamdani as well.
And people like that understand that fundamentally and foundationally. Now, to understand is not to achieve any outcome, meaning identifying a problem is one thing. Actually, what you do to promote it. So our philosophy, my philosophy, and the work we've done here in the state is about, yes, growth. We promote it. It's a point of pride, innovation, entrepreneurialism. I don't want to stifle that. I'm one of those Democrats, with all due respect, I don't begrudge other people's success. I admire the hell out of it. I'm someone that comes from a private sector background. I opened a small restaurant and wine store right out of college. One part-time employee, Pat Kelly, and she passed away a year and a half ago. God bless her. Started with pen to paper, $7,500, and got 13 investors and built that to 21 small businesses, about 1,000 employees. And I'm not saying that to impress you, but to impress upon you my passion for entrepreneurialism. So I want to make that clear. But I'm also not naive that businesses can't thrive in a world that's failing. And that's what you've just described. And that's why this notion of growth has to also be attached to inclusion.
This right here is the meat and potatoes of what I wanted you to address, in particular, Professor Wolff, because I heard Van there ask a good question. And it was about whether capitalism fundamentally is at the core of the enormous income wealth inequality that we're seeing in California and across the country. He references the fact that the average one bedroom in California is $3,000 a month. And in response, Gavin Newsom does what I think a lot of Democrats are now hip to doing. And this is what concerns me. Everyone understands it's an affordability crisis. Everyone understands that Bernie and Mamdani are popular. So they will say the following that only Bernie used to say, which is that 2/3 of wealth is concentrated among the 10%. They will engage in some of this 99% versus the 1% language. He will even give Bernie credit for identifying the problem. Right. But if you noticed, he was very quick to say, but that doesn't mean I agree with his solutions. And then he goes on to say he does not begrudge other people's successes, that he himself worked himself up in some kind of Horatio Alger tale, which is not how I understand Gavin Newsom's origin story to be.
No. wasn't his dad like a lawyer for the Getty family? I mean, you know,
yes.
born on third base where you hit a triple, right? I mean, that's that guy.
Yes. Yes. So all that being said, I think the Gettys, the Newsoms, and the Pelosi's are like the three longtime, well-connected California families, a dynasty of sorts. But given all of that, I want to get your take, Professor Wolff, on how Gavin answered that question and what your follow-ups might have been if Van had the benefit of being an economics professor and pushing back in a more concrete way on Gavin's sort of pivot from the core issue of whether or not capitalism is driving the wealth inequality in the state.
I think your key word there, Brianna, is the word pivot. He's asked the question about the distribution of wealth and income. And he answers a question in which he talks endlessly and then throws in, and inclusion too, when he talks about. What is he talking? He said, I want to grow the wealth. Well, let me be the teacher. Bear with me. I know it's a drag, but I'm going to do it anyway. It says
we are here for it.
It's as old as Methuselah, what he's doing. Rich people recognize that they're rich. They are obsessed by it because it frightens them, as well it should. You're a billionaire, you're sitting in this rich state of California, surrounded by the people in those tent cities that you drive by on your way to Highway 101. I mean, we all know it. Those of us who visit California, we see the same tent city you do. And so the rich people are always worried that they are the few in a sea of the many. And boy, is that true now. So what have they always come up with? Here's the solution. It's like a pie, they say. You can cut the pie into different pieces. But here's the solution when there's a complaint about who gets how much. Grow the pie. You see, because if you grow the pie, then we, the rich, can get more, and the people with a little piece, they get more too, because the pie is growing. The solution to inequality is growth. And then you tell a story about a little business that became big. This is total caca. I'm being as polite as I know how. Mr. Newsom, the problem is the division of the wealth. That's a problem in California. It's 100 or 200 years old. It's been as old as your state is, if not older. You haven't done anything about it, and growth never solved that problem because it isn't a growth problem. It's a problem about how you divide whatever you're doing, number one. And number two, if you really believe, and he says it, that you can't be a healthy business if you're in an unhealthy economy. That's our problem. The United States, let me be blunt, we are not the center of the world anymore. It's over. The American empire is over, and the American capitalist system is in trouble because of it. There is a new empire emerging. I don't know how that's all going to work out, whether we're all going to be learning Chinese pretty soon. But that is the reality. And by the way, I'm not endorsing China. China has lots of problems. That's not the issue. They have figured out, guess what? How to grow the pie. They've been growing their pie way faster. Let me make it clear. For the last 35 years, China has grown its GDP every year 2 to 3 times faster than the United States, and this year is no exception. That's why China is what it is. Don't tell me we favor entrepreneurship, really? Well, what the hell do you think they were doing? They know how to make entrepreneurs. That's why they make the best electric car in the world. That's why they make the best solar energy. That's why they're outproducing us in the most advanced chip technology. All of that. What are you talking about? If growth is really what you care about, you're not doing that very well. That's why people are complaining like crazy. Had you grown the pie, Jack, you wouldn't be in this dilemma. But you didn't. And to tell us now that the heat is rising, that Bernie is popular and Mamdani is popular, yeah, now you have to face it. You're going to turn to us and tell us we're going to have growth. And we're concerned about inclusion, but we're going, oh my God. This man is reinventing a wheel that is already flat.
I'm so glad you picked up on that inclusion point as well, Professor Wolff. He pivots to that, and then I think in a way that is pandering to the Black audience he's in front of, but also emblematic of the Democratic Party's strategy over the last 30 years or so to disguise their fundamental conservatism in the economic realm by highlighting these sort of cultural issues. In identity groups that, frankly, they're not doing a good job of protecting either. But then I'm not gonna play all of this part for you, but they go on and on for a while after that about Black and brown and identity groups, yada yada yada. And what is a clear pivot from my view, Butch, I want to get you in here as well.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, because even though I'm not an economic historian, I am a historian. I do social history, political history, history of revolution.
Yes, Professor Ware. Sorry, I should have been calling you Professor Ware this whole time too.
It's new for me to always be introduced as a political candidate. And it's cool with me. So with the I'll have the audacity and nerve to throw a little bit of additional economic history, which I know Professor knows better than I do, right? This rising tide lifts all boats nonsense that we all heard under Reagan, and just understand that Team Blue is now so far to the right of Reagan that you can't even see Reagan from where Gavin Newsom is standing. Okay, that trickle down economics that they were, pumping, that which is this way of talking about neoliberalism, like let the private sector eat first. In the 19th century, they did not call it trickle down economics. You know what they called it in the 19th century? They called it horse and sparrow theory. Horse and sparrow theory was ridiculed by economists because the idea was that you stuff a horse full of so much oats that it can't digest them all, and the sparrows can come through and pick it out from the feces. Whether it is
I see why they needed a rebrand.
And that
eat horseshit theory doesn't sound as good as trickle down.
But no one misses the message. No one misses the message.
No one misses the message, because whether it's trickling down or whether you're sifting through the crap, it's all the same toilet. And all abundance is the repackaging of these completely nonsensical, you can't even call them economic theories, because they're just capitalist propaganda. And so the Professor Wolff's point about you called it an unhealthy economy indeed, right? Unhealthy being like the kind of key word there. General Motors spends more money on its healthcare than it spends on the steel for its vehicles, right? That the inability to solve a basic social problem that is about societal benefit rather than individual corporate profit actually is destructive of commerce, right? So what's going to happen in the state of California when I actually pass universal single-payer healthcare in the state of California, which Gavin Newsom with his lying ass ran on and then backstabbed the people as soon as he was in power, because $2.7 million was laid down on the Democrat Party's on the State House, and they refused to bring single-payer to a vote. This is the same party that in 2006 and 2008 had passed single payer when Schwarzenegger was the governor, because they knew he would veto it, right? That perfect performative politics, pretend to be working for the working class. Well, what happens when we actually pass it? Commerce is actually going to run to the state of California, because healthcare will be covered universally, right? And then union organizers can actually be focused on negotiating for better wages and better working conditions, and it will rebalance the relationship between small businesses and the big corporations. Because why is it that small businesses have difficulty competing and that these mega corporations are able to consolidate wealth and power? Yes, it has to do with the regulatory environment that has been facilitated by these thieves and criminals like Gavin Newsom, but it also has to do with the fact it's an economy of scale around healthcare. If you're a small business owner, you're going to have your folks on Cobra, and that is going to make you uncompetitive. We are going to turn into a commercial powerhouse in the state of California when we are not addicted to this fake neoliberal horse and sparrow nonsense.
I'm so glad you brought up healthcare, Butch. Let's go to the let's start at the 46-minute mark, watch a couple minutes there, and then we're going to hop ahead a little bit. And at 46 minutes, we get Van asking, again, another pointed question, because they go back and forth in this interview about whether or not Democrats have a messaging problem. And there's a whole section where they talk about, how Democrats aren't fighting hard enough, how they have to be willing to go where Republicans are. And Gavin really touts his willingness and facility at engaging with kind of Republican old guard types and debating them on the mainstream news. And he also touts his willingness to invite people like Charlie Kirk on his own podcast, an issue that Lindsay and Van push back against in a sort of interesting way. But let's put that to the side for a second, because they come back and Van asks, okay, we've been talking a lot about messaging. But sure, there's a messaging problem, but also there's a problem. Let's listen at 46.
And I would say this about the Democratic Party and the Democratic establishment. There is a messaging problem, but there is also a problem. And that problem is there are far too many people in this country who, over the last X amount of years, did not feel like their lives were changing because they were in lockstep with the Democrats. They didn't feel like, we can look at any number of issues, healthcare, housing, affordability, all of these things. I know that you're running for president, and we know that you're going to announce it right here to this camera on the Higher Learning Podcast that you are in for 2028. What are the answers to these? But I agree with you and I disagree with you. Okay. I'm going to say this with mad love and respect. Obamacare is meaningful, man. What Joe Biden did to extend the subsidies, it's the whole debate on the shutdown. Certainly. Is about what Biden Democrats did to extend the subsidies. Otherwise, you're going to see the doubling of your damn healthcare. That's the Democratic Party. So I'm proud of that. We did do more on healthcare.
We did do more in terms of jobs. You had the lowest black unemployment in history under the Biden administration, lowest unemployment for women in history under the Biden administration, lowest unemployment rate in 60 years under the Biden administration. We're in the fastest growing economies in the world, and we had inflation cooling when this son of a bitch got in. That said, we also had an industrial policy that was worker-centered, that talked about childcare, that was not centered on politics and division, that also was supporting rural parts of this country and red states. I was very proud of that. And I was proud of the policy making of Joe Biden. 400 bipartisan bills, the CHIPS and Science Acts, the IRA, the work he was doing on low carbon green growth and clean energy that this son of a bitch is getting rid of. That was the Democratic Party. It was folks like Jeffries and others that delivered that, and Clyburn that delivered that. I don't know. I didn't think it was all shit. I thought it was kind of meaningful. That said, I do think there's these systemic trend lines. And again, Bernie connects to that in a profoundly deep way that also has to be addressed. But I don't think we were full of shit in the last few years. And that's why I was proud to be out there for Biden and Harris. I really was. And I don't say that timidly. I say that as a guy who's been critical of my party. But, the party did a lot of goddamn good things. I think, and just not good enough. We have more work to do.
I got to say, it really gives me the ick the way that folks like Gavin are smart enough to sort of weaponize the popularity of Bernie while completely ignoring that Bernie's popularity is largely rooted in his 40-year-long fight for universal health care, for Medicare for all. I saw you shaking your head in there, Butch, as he was defending the ACA and sort of characterizing Biden as having gotten a lot right. What was going on in your head when you were listening to that?
I mean, so this is a perfect example, right? The crisis that they're sitting in right now is one that they created for themselves by eliminating single payer, which is what Bernie was running on and which is what everybody wants. So they're now having to, stage performative resistance. They made their own bed and now they're lying in it. That's the part that was, making me crazy just watching him talk about it. And then the other piece, frankly, since you asked what was going on in my head, was I actually sort of understand the Team Blue fascination with Gavin Newsom because he's Bill Clinton 2.0, right? He is a very slick delivery mechanism for a bunch of neoliberal policies. Like earlier in the segment, we talked about it's been decades, right? That this has been going on. Well, it goes back to Clinton. Clinton was the most effective Republican president of our time. He ushered in all of these neoliberal policies. And Gavin Newsom is very much wired like Clinton because that Democrat base wants to be lied to, right? They want this kind of, smooth criminal in front of them that will tell them all that it's about inclusion and they're going to reference Bernie and those 2/3, but they're not going to say people are responding to Bernie's critique and that's why we destroyed Bernie. Right? People are responding to Mamdani's critique and that's why we're going to destroy or co-opt Mamdani. So they what I was actually thinking about in that very moment was Malcolm. I was thinking about Malcolm. He's always over my shoulder. He's my mentor and hero intellectually. Malcolm said in 1964, the white liberal is the most dangerous thing in the Western Hemisphere. And when I look at Gavin Newsom, that's what I'm thinking. And because when Malcolm said that, 64, white conservatives are hanging Negroes from trees. White conservatives are turning dogs and fire hoses on black protesters. White conservatives are putting bullets in the brains of white voting rights activists and burying them in shallow graves next to Mississippi roads. And Malcolm said what he said. And the Democrat response has been to turn things on Trump as though the white conservative is the problem and is the danger. But Gavin Newsom, a white liberal, has been running this state into the ground. And with corporate liberal control over the state of California, super majorities, essentially for the last 40 years, we have the highest wealth inequality of any state in the union. So for me, it's all just Slick Willie 2.0. It is fast talk, to put lipstick on a pig. That's that you asked why I was shaking my head. That's why I was shaking my head.
Professor Wolff?
Yeah, here's what was in my head. First of all, if you noticed in his quick I'm taken aback by the speed with which that man talks. Here I am in New York City. We're famous for talking fast, but this really makes me think of the Flim Flam Man. Wow. Before you can react to one sentence, he's already on to the next one. And in there was, we had the fastest growing economy under Biden. That's not correct. That is, at best, a mistake. And at worst, he's just lying through his teeth. He must know better. We were not close to the fastest. Both India and China go much faster than the United States in the years of Mr. Biden's presidency. Mr. Biden's economy was lethargic, ineffective, couldn't even recover in time from the pandemic or the crash of 2020. No. This is not a good performance at all. And by the way, much of Wall Street literature that I read every day would agree with what I'm saying. This is not some far left-wing perspective. He's just making it up. And he may curse out the president for making things up, but he's doing a pretty good job of that. Number two, the messaging. When I hear people talk about messaging, I usually reach for my wallet because I'm afraid someone is grabbing my wallet out of my pants. What are you talking about? The whole Biden administration had a theme. You may remember this. The economy is great, but the people don't seem to know it. We're not getting the message out. We are doing.
You're not loving Bidenomics? Yeah, sorry.
Biden, right? Biden. You remember that? And there were a number of people who were getting really close to bemoaning how stupid the American people were, that they didn't understand what the statistic. And there were economists, I wasn't the only one, not by a long shot, who were saying, hello, the people are right. You are full of excrement. That's your problem, not the problem.
Horse and sparrow.
What are you doing? Yeah, back to the sparrow. What are you talking about? But here's the biggest one. When the Democrats are in power, like Biden, they give huge money, bills, they pass bills that give huge amounts of money to literally a list of 50 major corporations. Those are the main beneficiaries. And what do we as economists know about what large American corporations do with the money they get, whether it be from the government or from selling their product? They divide it up in a certain way. How is that? What is that way? Here's the answer. It's what they learn to do in business school. And I know that because I teach in business schools from time to time. Here's what we tell them. Minimize your labor costs. That's a polite way of saying, screw the workers. Yep. Number two, be sure to maximize the profit that you can distribute, A, to your shareholders as dividends, B, to your shareholders as capital gains, rising value of your company, and number three, to the automation that will save you even more on your labor costs. So, the problem of the American economy, the gross inequality that Butch is talking about, is a product of how corporations take the money being spent on their product and on them as institutions and divide it up. But that's the problem, is how they divide it up. So the Democrats want us to say, thank you for giving it to the corporations for doing nice things. Yeah, they may do nice. They may build a bridge. They may. But they're going to divide the wealth in a very particular way, exactly like they always have. You're not changing that problem, Jack. You're perpetuating it.
I knew this was going to be, I hoped this was going to be as synergistic as it ended up being, but I am over the moon at what you guys are both bringing to this table. Let's keep it going. The 53-minute mark.
We won't let you get a word in edgewise. I mean, Wolff Ware is a lot of work.
No, I invited this monster into my life, and I'm loving it. People get this wrong about me. I don't want to be talking. I'm happy to be a student, and you two professors are really taking me to school. Let's jump to the 53 mark, because Van follows up with a pointed question about Mamdani and why he's not getting Democratic Party support. And you can hear it, right? The couple times Mamdani's come up already. Gavin's kind of been like, oh, yeah, sure, Mamdani too. Yeah. He's willing to sort of heap praise on Bernie, but he seems reluctant to do so about Mamdani. It feels like Van senses this and asks him a pointed question about it. And then has some follow-up about the Medicare for All issue and why it is that Democrats don't get behind policies like Medicare for All that are overwhelmingly popular with their base and people outside of their base, including independents and 49% of Republicans. Let's roll the tape.
When you look at someone like Mamdani and the success that he's had in New York, I think that represents a really interesting quagmire for the Democratic Party. He's talking about very populist ideas that talk directly to people and affordability. You know, if you look at some of the ideas that we're talking about, it seems like the Democrats, the establishment of the establishment wing of the Democratic Party, is not in lockstep with their constituency as much as they used to be. Like if you poll single payer health care, if you poll other things that are to the left of the party, it seems as if people are yearning for something that the Democrats are still unwilling to deliver to them. And the question is why? Like why? And you know, we're going to talk about Israel and some of the things that have happened just recently in a second. But the question is, why does the center wing of the party, the establishment wing of the party, still seem to be unable to come to terms with populist ideas that people like? Like, I've watched Mamdani have this incredible success and run a campaign that's based upon lowering the price of halal, of making New York a place where working people can live. And I've watched the party drag their feet in supporting someone who seems to be a rock star. And it makes me wonder if the Democrats really want it.
Yeah. I have to unpack that and, you know, moving even thousands of miles away from Mamdani specific. I think, and I don't know this is the right answer, and I'm reflecting on, as you're asking this, trying to answer it in a novel way, because I'm trying to truly digest the point you're making. I think it's just the practical application of ideals. And so you talk about the establishment party. I assume that most of these people in office, people in positions of power.
I'll define that for you.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, you can respond any way you want, people that seem to be funded by a very specific corporate donor base.
Well, okay. And that, in that respect, that's a separate and above conversation. But let me try to unpack this. I have to manifest ideals. I'm governor. I have to also work pragmatically with my legislature. There's certain constraints on my office. I mean, we talk about Havel. I was joking. He said, you know, as his position as Czechoslovakian president, he said it degeniused him. He talked about the constraints of office.
Wow.
The constraints of office, the rule of law, court's decision, court of public opinion, certain practical realities. To say is not to do. And I see this conversation. It's interesting how often I resonate with Obama when I hear him talk about, you know, you didn't do this or do that. And it's like, wow, you know, you have certain realities that you're confronted with. A campaign is one thing. Campaigns are fantastic. You know, this and that. Then you get into office. You have to work with people to actually make them so. And that is about give and take. And dare I say the worst word, compromise sometimes. Not compromising values or principle. I'll give you a specific example. I've long believed it's inevitable in this country to have single payer. It's just inevitable. Healthcare costs are devouring too much of our budget, too much of our retirement. It's an inevitability. I really believe that in the core. I was tasked as governor to try to figure that out. We ended up with the only state in the United States of America, and I get a lot of shit for this, including from Rogan, that has universal health care, regardless of pre-existing conditions or ability to pay or your immigration status. Mike Johnson's attacking me almost on a daily basis on this point. I delivered that. But I didn't deliver a single payer. Newsom's full of shit. He's not a progressive. Even though we did more in this space than any state in U.S. history. And Obama did more for healthcare than any president in modern history.
All right. Let's wrap it there. Okay. He was asked pointedly why Democrats don't back popular policies. He says, look, I'm not going to talk about Mamdani specifically. I've got to, quote, manifest my ideals. I see you making the three-card Monte gesture, Butch. I'm going to come to you in a second.
He's like doing a straight-up shell game. Sorry, but yes.
No, he says he has legislative constraints, and he says that he thinks Medicare for all is inevitable, but I didn't hear anything about his willingness to fight for it. Take it away, Professor Ware.
Okay. So yeah, the shell game, the three-card Monty, I watched that clip. I watched the whole thing. It was hard, but I watched the whole thing, and I realized that like he is actually as flummoxed, stripped naked and embarrassed by that question as he is by the AIPAC question, which is about to come down the pipe. Like, in a different world, that would also be a viral clip. I'm going to keep this as simple as possible because I want to get to those AIPAC questions. So I'm going to try to be brief, which is not my strong suit. If you were to make a Venn diagram of the donor base of teams red and team blue, you would be staring at a single circle. AIPAC would be in the middle of it. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, the 5 weapons manufacturers that get about 60% of our defense budget. He cannot respond to a question that is about the corporate ownership of the Democrat Party because they cannot be clear about the fact that they serve the exact same oligarchs as the people that they are pretending to fight. And that is always going to put corporate Democrats into that kind of uncomfortable position because, as I said before, who funds you runs you. If you want the old school version of it, the one that paid a piper called a tune, right? And so Gavin has to tap dance in that moment around the fact that the Democrat Party is a wholly owned subsidiary of a handful of corporations. Professor Wolff pointed out that basically they just divvy up our tax dollars between about 50 corporations. And whenever that comes to, whenever that moment is the thing right behind the curtain, they have to do that thing from the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, right? Because as soon as you peel back the curtain, you realize that the fundamental problem is complete and total corporate ownership of both parties, and then that they have to stage a fake culture war between red and blue to cover the fact that both parties are capitalist parties that are systematically coming after your rights, your civil liberties, and every penny in your pocket to hand it over as subsidies to their corporate donors.
Amen. Professor Wolff?
Yeah, I love this word constraint. It's a lovely word that most people don't use for good reasons. Politicians use it when they want you to know that had they their druthers, would have done wonderful things for all of us, just the things we want, were it not for, pregnant pause, the constraints that a practical man or woman would have to acknowledge. I mean, this is like listening to a mediocre minister who's had too much to drink the night before give you the sermon the next morning. After 5 minutes, you realize we'd all be better off if we hadn't come to church that day, right? It's really silly, the constraints. He admits in an earlier clip you show us that the housing problem has been that way for decades. He's so concerned that he repeats it at least once or twice, decades. In other words, don't bother me. It's been a problem a long time. And that leads him to be grateful. Here we go. Be grateful for the little bit I got done because it's been horrible for so long. And then what's the reason he got a little bit of done? Because he was limited by the constraints. But Jack, that's what made it so lasting for those decades. All your predecessors were limited by constraints. If you're a politician, one of the things you ought to be concerned about, if you've paid attention, is the constraints. So you would have to figure out, if you're going to do anything, how to get around them, how to get rid of them, how to undo them. Or to say the same thing in plain English, you would have to mobilize the public that supports you to undo the constraints that block you. So for me, the quintessential example is Obama, whom he seems to like. Obama, I was part, I won't go into details, but I was part of a group that had a long conversation with Obama in the White House. The group did. Where he told the group, look, I'd like to do more of whatever you want, but I can't do it unless there's a popular support. Okay? Then we had the Occupy Wall Street movement. And Mr. Obama crushed it. It was what he asked for. It was a mass movement. In a few weeks, 300 cities across America, you all know this, had their tent cities downtown, had their... It overwhelmed everybody what the reaction was. There was a moment to do something about those everlasting constraints, Mr. Obama, and all you did was organize the dismantling of this effort. You can't have it both ways. You can't excuse yourself because you're limited by constraints and then do absolutely nothing to nip in the bud every movement that emerges to deal with those constraints. You're not their friend, not at all. You never have been, and he isn't either. This is pure. I don't mean to quote you all the time, Butch, but you began with telling us about bullshit, and bullshit is with us.
Can I just Professor Wolff, you literally, so you gave the exegesis, so that's my other field, religious history. You gave the exegesis of what Malcolm was saying when he said that the white liberal is the most dangerous thing. And the reason is Malcolm said this. He said the liberal is a fox. It bares its teeth. You think that it's smiling at you, but you are on the menu. The conservative is a wolf. When it bares its teeth, it's into a vicious snarl that leaves the black man with no illusion as to where he stands. The reason why Malcolm said what he said about the white liberal being the most dangerous thing is that an open enemy is less dangerous to you than a concealed enemy, than a one, to take your words that you just said, to quote you back, that pretends to be your friend, right? Like what's the OJ's, song? Smile in your face, all the while they want to take your place. Backstabbers.
Backstabbers.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so that was like, and if you know, right? But that's the thing. Like that's what makes them so dangerous, is that they perform this role of friend of the working man, friend of the person of color. But in point of fact, and I said this in the SEIU Local 1000 debate, which after that debate, Katie Porter, poor Katie, was on stage for that. When they closed the room to make a vote and ask best candidate, we won that vote overwhelmingly. I won that vote overwhelmingly. And the reason was, as I said, plain and simple, I said that you cannot represent management and the shop floor at the same time. You're going to have to pick one or the other, right? You cannot, be in the employ and the pay of the corporate billionaire class and also represent the working class. You're either going to have to get somebody in power that represents the working class or the ruling class. And that's the choice that I'm giving y'all. And that's the fundamental problem. Last one from Malcolm, just because I keep seeing him on screen over my shoulder. In 1964, he said, in the Ballad of the Bullet, he said, of the Democrats, he said, you put them first and they put you last. And that makes you a chump. That makes you a political chump. And I walked off of that stage saying, ain't y'all tired of being chumped by these people? Right? Because that's ultimately what it is. They pretend as though they're showing up in service of you, but they are actually showing up in service of those corporate donors and that 1% class.
Yeah.
If I could add something, Brianna, because everything, I'm happy with everything we're doing in this conversation. I'm grateful to you for making a program like this. This is it really is. I'm excited too, and I do a lot of these. So somehow we're getting at it. And the clips you chose, and Butch, you're really very eloquent about these things. But here in New York City, as I'm in Manhattan, so I voted for Mamdani. You know, I'm wrapped up in all of this.
And I'm rooting for Mamdani still, even with all the things that
no. And I am also. Look, I'm even grateful that Newsom is pushing back against Trump. I admire that he's doing something there. I wish more Democrats, even of the establishment, would do as loud as he sometimes is, trolling him and all that. But there is something going on here that is hopeful, really hopeful, that the Mamdani support blows my mind. I live in an apartment complex here in Manhattan. I talk to the people in my area here, a lot of high-rise buildings and a lot of people, 40,000 in the complex I live in. I'm amazed. Something has happened that those people are aware of what we've all been saying, that the people like Newsom are caught. That's how they're talking now. They're caught between the people who pull the strings and all of us.
Yep.
Every time I hear that us in the elevator, I'm going, ooh, this is very interesting.
Is that class consciousness for me?
That's what I want to say. That what Mamdani is doing, whether he intends it or knows it or not, I don't know. I don't know him personally. By the way, I do know his father. And Brianna, if you want to get someone on your program, this is a very, very smart man.
I would love to have Professor Mamdani on the show.
Yeah, he is a professor at Columbia University. He's very well known around the world. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on East Africa, Kenya, and the economic experience of Kenya as a colony. And
got a couple of Africanists in the room, Bree.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I grew up there.
Yeah, well, I learned Swahili. I mean, I really did the work.
Well, I didn't. But
I wrote.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I wrote a book. The first book I ever published is about British colonialism in East Africa, and I learned the literature. And by far, the greatest book ever written on that subject is by his father, Mahmoud Mamdani, and known for other things too, but known for that book. But anyway, the point, something is emerging here because there's beginning to be, dare I say it, a mass awareness of what we've been talking about. There is a mass awareness that the Newsoms of this world are caught. Even in another way, a Cuomo is caught. He is who he is. He's trying to be a contestant with Mamdani. He can't do it. The people they see a gap. Mm-hmm. And in that gap, unless we're all surprised in a couple of weeks, in that gap, Mamdani is winning that game. And the long-range result may very well be a quantum step, a leap forward in mass consciousness, so that what we from the left are saying will have much more of an audience than we had before.
I think that's right. And I take your point about optimism. I think maybe I'm asking too much. Obviously, there's many people, many on the left, who think that I am and who see me as sort of insatiable. I'm never happy. I'm an ultra leftist, whatever the characterization is. But it's precisely because I see how Bernie, for 40 years making this case, created some of that gap, that Zohran has picked up the mantle and is expanding that gap, and it was able to do so an incredible amount on the particular issue of Israel-Palestine and the genocide in Gaza, which was perceived to be the most polarizing issue that there was in the city with the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. Right. And he won the people over. Yeah. But it's precisely because I see that capacity that I do pause when I see that capacity not deployed in other issue areas. And it is also why when I see someone like Gavin Newsom having the wisdom to start to adopt some of the language that has been used by people like Bernie that have created that gap, I get nervous. Because while I agree that there has been a shift in public consciousness, I also believe it to be easily co-opted. Mm-hmm. And that is what we're watching at present. We're seeing the abundance movement trying to move into that space. We're seeing all these efforts to rebrand and reclaim progressive language, leftist language, in service of the same old thing. And I do worry that because Newsom also has some significant rhetorical skills, like Mamdani, that he is using those skills for evil. And I do wonder if Mamdani, facing the pressures that he's facing, might give up opportunities to widen the gap more broadly than he already has done, in exchange for what I perceive to be the lesser victory of simply being mayor of New York. And that's a subjective view. And you can say it's more important to be mayor and to at least have the platform, to have the opportunity to widen the gap. And I appreciate that perspective. You know, I'm of two minds about it. But when I see him at this juncture be given the floor to persuade the public the way he did on Gaza and all these other issues and to decline to do so, it does give me pause.
You know, I appreciate every word you say. I see all the risks that you lay out. Let me tell you why I still see it a little bit differently, so that I end up being less worried about the risks of what Mamdani might do. And you're quite right, he could go either way. Something is going on, and I see it elsewhere too, but clearly here in New York. They go for Mamdani not because he's a Muslim and not because he's a socialist. He says those things, doesn't back away from that, which is good, but that's not it. It's, at the risk of exaggerating, they are not going for him. They are going against everything else. Cuomo, Sliwa, Adams, horrible. Just the way people talk, it's a kind of get out of my sight. You're corrupted beyond word. Where Newsom and the others are going to come is they're going to figure this out if they haven't already. And maybe abundance is an answer. But if I had to reduce it, people are in fact turning against capitalism. They won't use that word, they're not, but they are. Capitalism has gone from something you don't even think about or question to something that you kind of almost expect a person to say something negative about.
Yeah.
You know, there was that moment when President Trump, denouncing Mamdani and suggesting he wouldn't allow him to become mayor. I don't know if you caught that about 10 days ago. He says that there's a social, then he corrects himself. Trump corrects himself in mid-sentence. He's not a socialist, having just said it. He's a communist.
A lot of people are saying he's here illegally. He's, we're going to look at everything, and ideally, he's going to turn out to be much less than a communist. But right now, he's a communist. That's not a socialist.
Oh, right. Really, you expected trumpets to sound, from on high. Wow, but that's a recognition that the socialism word doesn't cut the mustard anymore. It's not strong enough. He has to worry for a moment, this president. Am I helping the guy by calling him? I don't want to do that. I want some other word that will hurt him. And by the way, if I'm right, then we have some cause for optimism. Because the one thing I can assure you, as a professional economist, the problems of American capitalism are not being solved. They're being worsened. Tariffs are not solving them. None of this stuff. This is political theater, quite effective, no question. But as a solution to the basic problems, not at all. And that means These situation that we're looking at is going to get worse. And what happens then?
Can I try to thread the needle between your two respective positions? And you know, I'm sure this will get arguments from each of you. So first, with respect to Mamdani, so Mahmoud Mamdani he wasn't at my institution, but he was a kind of academic mentor for me at different points in my career. Did events with him when I was at Michigan. I came to Columbia several times to speak in his lecture series, went out to dinner with him. I know that Zohran has been trained up with all of the appropriate revolutionary Marxist theory. I teach Mamdani's book on indirect rule in colonial Africa all the time. So I know his bona fides are there. That was never my question. Similarly, we have a lot of mutual acquaintances and friends in the Muslim community in New York, which was hugely supportive of the Stein Ware campaign and who vouched for Zohran's personal integrity, like his commitment to the things that he says that he believes in. And so for that reason, I said before the election that I'm supporting him and I'm rooting for him. But as soon as the election happened, I said that there are three outcomes and three outcomes only. He will either break the party will break him, or he will leave the party. And the reason is that the Democrat Party is no place for socialism. That socialism cannot work or function inside a capitalist party. So the fear that I hear you express, Bree, is the same one that I have, which is that, as always, this will just be one more sheepdog movement that keeps an actual opposition from emerging, which goes back to where I started. The Democrats are the most effective counterinsurgency organization ever to emerge in human history. Now, the positive point, I agree with you, Professor Wolff, because on these campuses, when I was this, Black Muslim anti-capitalist, professor 20 years ago at age 30, yes, and I'm 51, still punching. 10% of our students, 5 maybe, would be anti-capitalist in their orientation, right? Now, easily 60%. Like, there has been a sea change with respect to that. The hope, and it was actually rereading Walter Rodney on the Russian Revolution that reminded me of this. Is that socialists don't take power in capitalist crises either through electoral forms or revolutionary forms, or because the Tsar goes into hiding and flees, because everyone has become socialist. Like, that's not why that happens. They win because they provide the best responses to people's material needs under the circumstances of crises in capitalism. And so what I see in the Mamdani moment is that when someone speaks to people's real material needs inside this crisis in capitalism and imperialism, the people are going to respond. But I remain more than pessimistic. I remain absolutely adamant and doomsday in my assessment of what the Democrats are. They cannot be reformed. And any and every resource that you give to them is a weapon that they will eventually use against you, right? Because the more you empower them, the more you are empowering a genocidal, capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist party. And so that's the reason why, I could never, under any circumstances, put on the jersey of Team Blue and run for office. And it's the reason why Mamdani, though he stands, I believe in his heart, for the right things, it's the reason why we're seeing him dragged to the right, because the forces inside that party are stronger than Zohran Mamdani is. They're stronger than Bernie was. Bernie had the chance to break him, and he did not want to take that chance. He said that he did not want to become Ralph Nader, right? to be his exact words. And that was my fear, just to be perfectly honest, as the son of a locksmith with a 6th grade education, who was sometimes that kid, Professor Wolff, that you refer to, that is going to school not knowing where they're going to sleep the next night. That was me. Mm-hmm. And growing up in DC when it was 97% Black, completely impoverished environment, and having to try to figure out a way to punch my way out of those situations, despite Mamdani's training and pedigree. I actually do not believe a kid that comes from that kind of background understands what it is to fight at this level. I don't think that it's the same as having 4 centuries of ancestors behind you who have had to punch, and you go to sleep in fear of letting them down by becoming right. And that's the issue, is that and that was the Obama issue too. The Obama issue was that some of these people have this kind of bourgeois disposition and lack of both the racial consciousness or the class consciousness to understand that capitalists and white supremacists and imperialists have to be fought. They cannot be reasoned with. You have to beat them. You cannot join them.
You know, it's interesting. I'm listening to you, Butch, and earlier when we were talking about, I think it's maybe also in the context of Zohran, you know, these kind of capitulations. Maybe it was with Gavin and fighting over healthcare and the constraints. Maybe it was in that part of the conversation. I remember thinking that there's a part of this interview on Higher Learning with Gavin Newsom that I didn't play for you, in which they're talking about his choice to have Charlie Kirk on and the difference of attitude that he has, you know, talking about Kirk and his family and him as a father and all of that stuff, versus how the 2 Black interviewers came to that same issue. And it was interesting because they were sort of pointing out that Gavin was wanting to gild himself in the glory of being willing to fight someone like Ron DeSantis and to have all this fight and to fight Trump and to be out there and be combative and to be the face of the Democrats pushing back. But there was this also conciliatory side of him where he invited Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk and folks like that to be the first guest on his podcast. And they specifically asked him, I can't remember if it was Rachel or Van, they were like, you didn't bring these people on to fight. You brought them on and you sort of rubbed shoulders and hobnobbed. And it felt like we're not against talking to anybody. We have all kinds of people on our own podcast, but you weren't here to draw contrast with them. It seemed like you were trying to ingratiate yourself with them. And he pushed back and they went back and forth. But it was reminding me of the clarity that so many Black commentators seem to have in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder, regardless of where they were on the political spectrum, that didn't seem to be there for so many white commentators, even those that were on the left, including my, you know, former boss, friend, and mentor, Ryan Grimm, who they have on Higher Learning all the time as a sort of a, you know, policy expert. And they had Ryan on and push him back at him against him, about some of the things that he had said about Charlie Kirk in a very interesting conversation that I encourage people to go and listen to. But what I'm trying to say is this. I think that the racial consciousness piece makes it very clear to most Black people that you have to pick a side when it came to Charlie Kirk, for instance. And I see some parallels there to when we're talking about some of these economic issues and Gavin Newsom saying, well, I don't begrudge anybody for making a buck. And this sort of, and I think Shama Sawan is very good at talking about this in really clear terms. Like, every billionaire is a policy failure. You can't fence it on this one because their profit, their success is a direct cost to me, comes at direct cost to me, and it's my immiseration. And I am glad to see it when people with racial consciousness understand it when it comes to racism and racists. I'm glad to see some economic populists and leftists understand it when it comes to the economy. I wish those groups were overlapping and everyone could see it in all of these contexts. But you know, politics, politics is this game. I wish it weren't, but it's perceived as this game where it does require this compromise. It's another word Gavin Newsom kept using: compromise. God forbid, compromise is an ugly word. He says it almost defensively. And it's not that there aren't opportunities for compromise, but there are definite places where it is not appropriate. It's just not. And I do think that there's this expectation that you always have to compromise in politics to win. But I'm looking at Donald Trump, and he seems very uncompromising and very successful. And that's part of what brings me back to Mamdani and my frustration, because there is no evidence that he even needs to compromise at this juncture to win. And so all the folks
he's beating the brakes off of him anyway.
Yeah, and he won the primary even being less compromising than he is now. So the people who would defend him saying, well, you won't accept a good thing happening, just take the win, just take the yes. Like, he wants actual power. Oh, the left doesn't want power. Like, well, there might be other instances where you can make that argument more persuasively, but this isn't one of them. So that's all I'll say about Mamdani. I don't want to belabor the point, and I've had you both here a long time. I do want to get to the money shot, as they say, and then I'll let you go.
You got to get the AIPAC. You got to get the AIPAC piece in.
Let's cue it up about the 101 mark. I'm going to start a little before the clip that's gone viral because I think it's useful to get some additional context.
A huge percentage of likely Democratic primary voters favor restricting U.S. military assistance to Israel until civilian concerns and the rights and self-determination, the rights and humanity of the Palestinian people are sufficiently addressed. Are you in favor of halting military assistance to Israel?
Well, I mean, the timing's a curious one when the precipice of a phase one deal that was announced today and a ceasefire.
Oh, even if this is over.
But I get it.
Yeah.
So look, no, I'm not prepared to say that I would support a blanket exemption for military support of Israel. That said, I've been very vocal in my opposition to Bibi Netanyahu. Said he doubled down on stupid on Meet the Press like a year ago. Mm-hmm. I'm sitting here on your behalf, you're a taxpayer, as the only governor in the United States that sent a field hospital to Gaza and got it in through a third-party country and is disgusted by what's happened in Gaza as a human being, as a father, to see these children and how this war has been perpetuated by Bibi Netanyahu. I also have deep respect for the right of the state of Israel to exist and defend itself. And I thought the attack by Hamas was a terrorist attack, and we have to be clear about that as well. When it gets into the nuances, and I know there was a bill in Congress on this, which I was not privy to the details of the bill, where there was an actual vote that on your question. That's one conversation of the specifics that I am not privy to the nuances of that in my job as governor. But a blanket restriction, I would have a difficult time supporting.
I guess the question is, if there's an admission or an understanding that the prime minister of a country is acting in a way that's either irresponsible, callous, or inhumane, why would we continue to support that country militarily?
I think that's the executive's role to leverage that. We do that a lot. I mean, that's part of the game of leverage. But to eliminate support across the board is something, to me, is a bridge too far. Conditioning in a thoughtful way with a flexibility of criteria, flexibility with conditions that are changing on an hourly or daily basis or weekly basis as it relates to not just what's happening in Gaza, but what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening in Iran, what's happening in Syria and other parts of the Middle East is where I think you have to be careful. And I just don't think there's a clean way of answering that without the nuance that I think it deserves.
AIPAC. I will not vote for a candidate that takes $1 from AIPAC.
It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. I haven't thought about AIPAC. And it's interesting. You're like the first to bring up AIPAC in years, which is interesting.
Why
did I say that? Not relevant to my day-to-day life.
Okay.
Which is just interesting.
Listen.
It's interesting you say that. JPAC perhaps more, but AIPAC less and less.
Okay, fair enough.
Which is just interesting.
What's interesting about it?
That it's just interesting as you bring up AIPAC, that it hasn't been part of, I'm just reflecting quite openly and honestly, hasn't been part of the day-to-day.
Yeah. The only reason why I ask is because with that, what I'm talking about is lobbying in and of itself. Look, let me be honest with you. The first thing that
Were you not honest this whole goddamn time?
I've been keeping it real with you. I've been keeping it real with you.
Hey, AIPAC.
Interesting.
AIPAC. I ain't thought about her in years. AIPAC. I don't even know. Is that even her name? I don't even remember a girl named AIPAC. It's interesting that you would mention AIPAC, and I definitely do not have AIPAC's number, saved under a different name on my AIPAC. Girl.
That's perfect, but that's exactly what he sounded like. AIPAC, I don't even know her.
What? You mean that girl that, what? Yeah.
You know, the problem is, seriously for a moment, a candidate in the full glare of the light, in a public way, putting on that piece of theater makes you worry about everything else the man says, because that man is lying right through his face there in a way that is so kind of, I don't even know the word I want here.
Venal? Wait, what did you say, Butch?
Here's what I let me say it in a nicer way. Why isn't he concerned that putting on a show the way he just did is going to make people shake their head? You're a major politician in this country at a time of the Israeli horror in Gaza, and you don't know about AIPAC? You just find it interesting? What? Why is he not aware of that this undercuts him?
Yeah.
Because sorry. Well, because no one in the media is going to ask, right? Kamala can do Rachel Maddow and not be asked about Gaza, and low key, like he goes straight into his black sense to try to defuse the moment. Gavin does right there, and I think part of what floored him is that he's actually not expecting credible journalism from a black podcast. There is some low key, high key anti-black. No, I'm not.
Yeah, saw bigotry of low expectations. He thought he was coming on a fun pop culture black podcast. He didn't know who he was dealing with. He
does not understand how Rachel Lindsay and Van Lathan are wired, right? That's just like Van comes for next, and he's supposed to. So I don't want to jump into my answer without being invited, but can I jump into my answer without being invited?
Go for it.
Okay, so the first thing, before we even get to what you called the money shot, not going to cut arms to genociders, right? That's point number one. Not going to cut arms to genociders. Point number two
is the law. Can I just pause you even there though for a second?
Please.
To be clear, that there's American law on the books called the Leahy Law that says that we cannot provide.
It's freaking illegal to begin with.
Right. This is not like an executive's prerogative or however he framed it. It is illegal to do what America has been doing for the last 2 years. The evidence was clear. Our own State Department reported back that Israel was blocking humanitarian aid, which is a condition of us continuing to provide financial support to the country. Continue.
It's worse than that because international law, and my colleague Laura Alborno, aka at Gazan Girl, is the one that educated me on this, is that actually every nation has a right to has a responsibility to intervene to stop genocide. Like that is actually a positive responsibility that is imposed by anti-genocide statutes. So not only are we violating domestic law by continuing to arm people that we know are engaged in genocidal activities, it is actually our responsibility to intervene to stop them. So it's illegal. And that was actually my point. So all three of his points are completely fallacious with respect to the law. The second, Israel has a right to defend itself. Of course it does not, because that is something that obtains between two sovereign nations, and Palestine is an occupied territory. The right to defend oneself is in an international conflict, and Palestine does not have that recognition, which brings us to point three. Hamas was a terrible terrorist attack. No, in point of fact, an occupied people has a right to resistance up to and including armed resistance, which is why when I was asked on Middle East Eye how Malcolm might have responded to the events after October 7th, that this is before I got called into electoral politics, I said that the right to resist is enshrined in international law. But we go further. I go further. We have a responsibility to resist, a moral responsibility not to allow occupying powers to slaughter and to rape and to murder and to genocide if we can stop them from doing so. So every single one of his initial framing points is the same kind of Zionist trash that you are going to get from this Zionist-owned party. And then last piece, let's just take a deep breath and look at Team Blue's performance this week, right? Gavin squirms like the snake that he is when questioned about being owned lock, stock, and two smoking barrels by AIPAC for the entirety of his career. And he can't, literally his brain breaks in front of all of us as he stammers to try to find a way to hide the evidence of his illicit affair. Cory Booker commits ritual suicide on television television by choking on his own tongue when asked about AIPAC. You guys all saw that one too, right? Didn't you?
Yep.
Do you think he's a war criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu? Do you think he's a war criminal?
Again, these are questions that a lot of people think are the important litmus tests that are loaded and hot. My urgency is to be an effective leader in bringing an end to this crisis. And I get these questions all the time that, to me, undermine my urgency.
I think the thing that Democrats get so frustrated with, where we are right now, where you see like the Zohran Mamdanis and the Graham Plattners rise up, because they can go on podcasts and you can say, do you think Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal? And they just say, yes. And that's the end of it. It's not all of the rhetoric answering. It's like what happens to Democratic politicians, they go through this like prism, and then we can't ever get like the answer to yes or no conversations like you do with Bernie and others. And that's the frustration for the Democratic
base. Do I think Netanyahu is worse than Trump? Yes.
Katie, I Stand with Israel Porter has a series of implosions like a sociopath on camera over and over again.
And the state could lose. Get out of my fucking shot.
I wanted to tell you that that's actually incorrect. It's not that it's electric vehicles. It's that if we don't meet the commitments under the Paris Climate Accord.
Okay, it does. Okay, you also were in my shot before that. Stay out of my shot. Okay, I'm going to start again with electric vehicles saving us money. Perfect.
Revealing not just her Zionist, we know that she's a Zionist. She made her I Stand with Israel. She's still speaking for JPAC now, has accepted almost $250,000 from Zionist donors. Zohran says, I'm going to have people in my administration who are Zionists. And it's continuing.
I will say,
I know the context.
I gotta push.
I know the
context. Tell us the context.
The context is that he's saying that this is a simple reality of the circumstance that he finds himself in. And if that was not the 20th piece of evidence that he has been sliding towards a liberal Zionist
but it was more than that. It was specifically like, he says something like, oh, there's going to be, garbage men or whatever that are going to be Zionists. We're not doing like ideological purity tests to hire people in civil government Which I think that is necessary. There's a lot of clean hits on Zohran. I don't know that I co-sign that one, but you're allowed to believe whatever you want to. Yeah.
But if you stack it after Israel has a right to defend itself, if you stack it after the way that he deployed like blatantly Islamophobic tropes, that globalize the Intifada, calls up bus bombings in Haifa, and not wanting that to come to New York City, like that is criminal malpractice, and that is the absorption of a bunch of Zionist talking points, which, to your point, he hasn't needed to do, right? And if anything, he is alienating a core part of his base by continuing to leave room for whatever interpretations might come with a piece of text like that. The last one, and we didn't even get to this as we're assessing Team Blue's overall position. How about Kamala? on her book tour, continuing to double down with her tone deaf and eye blind treatment of like, well, why aren't you out protesting Trump? It was because you started this genocide and you lost because of this genocide, and we have Trump because you would not stop genociding.
I'm not president. And if you want to talk about legacy, let's talk about the legacy of mass deportation of people not voting and Donald Trump.
So all of it, and your point on Zohran is a fair one. I won't argue that back. He is certainly the least of the offenders out of the ones that I've mentioned. But it frames the overall problem with Team Blue on the whole. And I would just summarize it this way. They're going to continue the fear mongering about the rise of fascism and the rise of Trump. But Here's one that Malcolm didn't say. This is another shepherd metaphor. The sheep is going to spend its entire life fearing the wolf, only to be eaten by the shepherd. Okay. And Team Blue is going to pretend like they're there to protect you from the rise of fascism. When Team Blue reveals through their bought and paid for-ness to Zionist genocidal monsters that they are no protection whatsoever. They're going to continue to pretend like the problem is Trump. They're going to continue to pretend like the problem is the right. But whether it is imperialism abroad or fascism at home, the relationship between Team Blue and Team Red is that one steals, the other holds the bag.
I have been overwhelmed by how much this conversation has exceeded my expectations. I mean, I thought I was kind of cooking when I figured I should have you both on at the same time. Like I had an inkling that I was onto something good. I had no idea that it was going to be, I'm just going to say it. I think this is it's definitely going to be in my top 5 episodes, one of my all-time favorites. I have enjoyed this immensely. And you have both brought very important, very distinct, essential perspectives to this conversation. And I do think that this interview, and all credit to Van Lathan as well and to Rachel Lindsay for conducting the interview that's been the fodder for this conversation. I think this has been a lens through which we can better understand our political moment in the Democratic Party. And I want to thank you both. Professor Wolff, I know you have a heart out, so I want to give you an opportunity first.
Oh man, I'm so sorry that I talked so much. I didn't know about the heart out. Go ahead.
No, not at all. No. I want to give you an opportunity to say any last thoughts you might have and to let people know where they can find more of you and your work on the internet and beyond.
Okay. I want to throw right back at you, though, a compliment. This is a very, very important conversation to have had. It didn't run away from hairy, difficult topics. You're famous for that. I can see better now why you are. More power to you. Do more of it. Because what the country needs. Otherwise, you sit and you watch, politicians wiggling around, after which, it's kind of boring after a while. The only thing I thought of to add is that we haven't touched on it, which is not a critique. It's just we haven't. One of the things that the horror of AIPAC brings up is the disgusting role of financial buying and selling of elections and of politicians. It's worth, and I know we're against it, money shouldn't control, but there's a lot to be said there. We brushed up against it, but we could talk about it again. And then there's a moment of horror I've had in the last 2 months, and I want to leave with an appeal that we don't lose it. I have watched in stunned disbelief, and I'm not naive. I've been around a long time, my own family history, as I alluded to earlier. I have watched 5 times now that the United States government has executed people in boats 1,000 miles away in the Caribbean coast off of Venezuela. No judge, no lawyers, no arrest, no evidence, no jury, nothing, and then execution. Every day in the United States, people are arrested for the drug traffic. Nobody kills them. It's not a capital crime. Nobody has been executed in this country either ever or for decades for that crime. What in the world is going on? Not only that you would do it, but that you would do it. You didn't arrest them. There's no evidence. There's now claims from Colombia and Trinidad that these are not even Venezuelans, that they were fishermen, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, of course. But the watching of this and the fact that leading Democrats don't say anything. Talk about violating international law. I mean, this really is, I understand it's not on the scale of Gaza. I understand, of course, but it is a stunning piece of behavior, a really stunning. And if it is followed up now with an attempt to overthrow Maduro in Venezuela, as the president has indicated with the CIA, and so on, then we are on the cusp of something wise people have been telling me for 6 months now, that we are not out of the woods of colonialism. We are entering another phase of the old colonial project. And one of the reasons the United States held on at quite a bit of cost to the support, the blind support of Netanyahu and the horror, the genocide in Gaza, is because that's an experiment in settler colonialism, which is having a comeback. Because if he does anything in Greenland or Panama or Canada, it will be another settler colonialism or something quite like it. Mahmoud Mamdani is a specialist on those subjects. So for me, there's a lot lurking right behind the surface of what we have been doing. And I just hope that you bring your journalistic sharpness to it in the months ahead.
I look forward to doing so. And I think you're right that is a topic. It's overwhelming, frankly, how many different subjects. I was listening to somebody else's podcast and it was higher learning. I was listening to the latest higher learning and they were talking about the Supreme Court Voting Rights Act stuff. And I thought to myself, it's been forever since I did any Supreme Court episodes and all that's been going on there. It's in the works. I'm planning it, but I appreciate the reminder, Professor Wolff.
Good.
Thank you so much. Where can people find more of you and your work on the internet and beyond?
We're doing more and more. My team is growing. I'm amazed. I'm what they call in Wall Street a contrarian. The worse the situation gets, the bigger the demand for me. The easiest way is to go to our website, democracyatwork.info. All one word, democracyatwork.info. And there you can get to the radio show and the TV show and the videos that we produce. I would warn you that we are having a problem with fake videos. I don't know if this has happened to you yet, but let me warn you, very slick using AI. The upper part of my face is actually me. The lower part of my face is another man with another mouth, not mine.
Oh, come on.
And they're everywhere. And I'm working with lawyers. I'm working with Google, trying to take them down. It is something that we're all going to be faced with soon. I just got off the phone before we started with Jeffrey Sachs. He's having a problem with all the videos he produces. It's the same issue. It's the same issue.
Oh, God, that's terrifying. We as a society have honestly got to stand up and just ban AI. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like, we can see the train coming down the tracks and we're doing nothing. Professor Wolff, if you have to go, because I know you have something at 3, go ahead and I'll say goodbye to Butch separately, but I really do appreciate your time.
And very nice to meet you, Butch. Really, it's been a pleasure. And I'm going to get in touch with you to talk to you about our show as well.
Pleasure is all mine, and I'll just say this: you can name your position and your salary in any future Ware administration. That's all I'm saying. Off of the top.
All right, so long, Professor Wolff.
Bye-bye.
And Professor Ware, tell people where they can find more of you and your work on the internet, and also remind them that if they are frustrated with everything they've heard from Gavin Newsom over the past hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it's been, that you are running for governor of California as well.
Running for governor in the state of California. The website is butchwareforgov.com or .org or .gov, but it's always BUTCHWARE, the number 4 and GOV. So that's the place where you can come to volunteer, to donate. It's the only place that you'll find a political campaign where the first thing that you're going to see on the website is mutual aid plus direct action plus electoral politics. I was trained up in the tradition of the Panthers. We don't believe in doing electoral politics by itself. We believe in turning political institutions into weapons of liberation. So that means working with the people that are doing the work on the ground. So this isn't your ordinary political campaign. If you're looking for me in other places and we're sending prayers up that we don't get a bunch of fake videos like Professor Wolff is having to deal with. But you can find me at Butch Ware, ButchWare, on all of the different kind of platforms. And I guess the last thing that I'll just say, since you invited me to mention it, all of the Democrat candidates in the state of California are Zionists. They're all people who stand with Israel, continue to support Israel. They're all taking the same position that Gavin Newsom is taking. And wherever you are on the ideological spectrum, if you want a governor in the state of California, and that, by the way, that includes Republicans as well, right? Steve Hilton, also a Zionist. Chad Bianco, also a Zionist. So all of that is to say is that while you might not agree with every last piece of my, personal politics, I'm actually showing up in service of the people. And the one thing that you will know for sure is that I'm working for you and not for a foreign government. And so if you are interested in actually having like an independent, not corporate owned governor, because we also don't take any corporate donations, you have to be an actual person in order to donate. So no PAC money, no corporate money. We work for the people and only for the people. The other candidates, the Democrats, are running to be the new Gavin Newsom. They're running to be the new version of that guy, whether it's Katie Porter or Javier Becerra or any of the rest of them. So if you actually want an option, you have a chance on June 2nd, 2026 in the primary to vote us into a position, to vote me into a position. It's a top 2 primary. The top 2 candidates advance. It's only going to take about 17 to 20% of the vote on that day in order to create a one-on-one matchup between me and whichever corporate Dem they run out there. And even if you don't think that a Green Party candidate can win, and by the way, Matt Gonzalez in 2003 almost ended Lil Gavin's career before it started because a Green Party candidate got 47% of the vote in the mayoral election and almost ended Gavin before he even started. And that was a Green Party candidate that was outspent many times over. He wasn't somebody that had been a vice presidential candidate or had been on the Breakfast Club. We have an easy and clean shot at these folks' chin. But even if you don't believe that, which would you rather have? Me pushing the Democrat left in a California gubernatorial election, or them continuing to run to the right and chasing after Steve Hilton or Chad Bianco? The reality is that even if you don't fully believe that an independent, not corporate funded candidate can win, the best bet is to roll the dice and see what happens and give us a puncher's chance on June 2nd, 2026.
All right, Professor Ware, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending all this time with me here today. You guys have both been enormously generous with me. Thanks to all of you who've tuned in to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And if you want to support this podcast and get additional episodes of Bad Faith Podcast, in addition to your free Thursday episode, you can subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast to get a Monday episode as well. Take care of yourselves, and as always, keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you, and as always, keep the faith.